When the mob threatened Sammy Davis Jr. because of his race, Dean Martin's response became the most legendary promise in Rat Pack history, proving that true friendship transcends all boundaries, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against hatred is unwavering loyalty. It was Thursday evening, October 14th, 1965, at the Copa Room in the Sands Hotel and Casino, and the Rat Pack was in the middle of their legendary Las Vegas residency. Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford had been performing together for 6 nights straight, creating the kind of spontaneous entertainment magic that had made them the most famous group of performers in the world. The show that night had been particularly electric. Sammy had brought down the house with his impression medley. Dean had charmed the audience with That's Amore, and Frank had closed the first set with My Way, to a standing ovation from the packed room of celebrities, high rollers, and tourists who had paid premium prices to witness entertainment history in the making. During the intermission, while Frank was in his dressing room taking phone calls and the others were mingling with VIPs, Sammy stepped outside the Copa Room to get some air and found himself face to face with 3 men who clearly weren't there for the show. The leader of the group was Tony the Fish Marcello, a mid-level enforcer for the Chicago crime family, who had come to Las Vegas on business that had nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with the kind of intimidation that helped maintain order in the criminal underworld. Marcello was in his 40s, built like a boxer, with cold eyes and the kind of presence that made normal people cross the street to avoid him. "You're Sammy Davis," Marcello said, and it wasn't a question. Sammy nodded, immediately understanding that this conversation wasn't going to be about autographs or requests for photos with fans. "I got a message for you," Marcello continued, his voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone that professional intimidators used when they wanted to make sure their words were taken seriously. There are people who don't appreciate seeing a colored performer getting the same treatment as white entertainers. People who think the natural order of things is being disturbed. Sammy felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came with racial confrontations, the mixture of fear and anger and disappointment that he had been experiencing since childhood, but had hoped would diminish as he achieved success and recognition. Sammy asked quietly, "Important people, people who have influence in this city, who control venues and bookings and the kinds of opportunities that can make or break a career. People who could make life very difficult for someone who doesn't understand his place." Marcello stepped closer, making sure Sammy could see the bulge under his jacket that indicated he was armed. "The message is simple. Stay in your lane. Perform for your people, in places where your people belong. Stop acting like you're equal to white performers. Stop demanding the same respect and the same treatment. Because if you don't, bad things might start happening to you and the people you care about." Sammy's mind was racing, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. In 1965, the civil rights movement was reaching its peak, but Las Vegas remained a city where informal segregation was still common, where black performers often couldn't stay in the same hotels where they performed, couldn't eat in the same restaurants as their white colleagues. But the Rat Pack had been different. Frank, Dean, and the others had insisted on equal treatment for Sammy, had refused to perform at venues that wouldn't accommodate him as an equal partner, had used their collective influence to break down barriers that had seemed impossible to overcome. Now, apparently, that progress was being seen as a threat by people who had the power to retaliate. "I understand," Sammy said, his voice steady despite the fear he was feeling. "Good," Marcello replied, "because this is the only warning you're going to get. Next time, the conversation won't be so polite." Marcello and his associates walked away, leaving Sammy standing alone outside the Copa Room, trying to decide what to do with information that could destroy everything he had worked to achieve, while potentially endangering the friends who had fought so hard to help him achieve it. Sammy decided to keep the confrontation to himself, at least for the moment. He returned to the Copa room, finished the second set with his usual professionalism, and tried to act normal while his mind wrestled with the impossible situation Marcello had created. But Dean Martin had been performing with Sammy long enough to recognize when something was wrong. During their final number together, Dean noticed that Sammy's usual spontaneous energy was missing, that he was going through the motions of entertainment without the joy that usually characterized his performances. After the show, Dean approached Sammy in his dressing room. "Sam, what's going on? You were off tonight, and you're never off." Sammy looked at Dean's concerned face and made a decision that would test their friendship in ways that neither of them had anticipated. "Dean, I need to tell you something, but I want you to promise me you won't do anything stupid when you hear it." Dean sat down, his expression growing serious. "What happened?" Sammy told Dean everything: Marcello's threats, the demand that he accept segregated treatment, the warning that bad things would happen if he continued to demand equal respect and opportunity. When Sammy finished, Dean was quiet for a long moment, his face showing the kind of controlled anger that people who knew him well understood was more dangerous than explosive rage. "Sam, you should have come to me immediately." "Dean, I don't want you and Frank and the guys getting involved in this. These people are dangerous, and if you stand up to them, they might come after all of you." Dean's response was delivered in a tone that Sammy had never heard from him before, a voice that carried absolute certainty and the kind of quiet authority that made it clear the conversation was over. "Sam, let me explain something to you. You're my friend. You're my partner. You're my brother in every way that matters. And nobody, not the mob, not racists, not anybody else, threatens my brother and walks away from it." Dean stood up, his movement deliberate and purposeful. "I'm going to find Tony Marcello, and I'm going to have a conversation with him. A conversation that's going to end with him understanding that threatening you was the biggest mistake he's ever made." Sammy started to protest, but Dean held up his hand. "Sam, this isn't just about you. This is about what's right and what's wrong. This is about standing up to people who think they can use fear and intimidation to keep talented people down because of the color of their skin. And this is about making sure that everyone in Las Vegas understands that anyone who threatens a member of the Rat Pack is going to answer to all of us." Dean found Tony Marcello 2 hours later at the Golden Nugget, where the enforcer was drinking at the bar and celebrating what he thought had been a successful intimidation. Dean walked up to Marcello's table, sat down without being invited, and began speaking in a voice that was conversational but carried undertones that made the mobster's 2 associates nervous. "Tony, I understand you had a conversation with my friend Sammy Davis tonight." Marcello looked up, recognizing Dean immediately, but not understanding why one of the most famous entertainers in the world was sitting at his table. "Martin, this doesn't concern you. This is business between me and the colored boy." Dean's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Marcello's associates exchange glances and start looking for exits. "Tony, let me explain something to you. Sammy Davis Jr. is not just my friend. He's not just my colleague. He's my brother. And when you threaten my brother, you threaten me." Dean leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But more than that, Tony, when you threaten Sammy, you threaten Frank Sinatra's brother. And Frank has friends you don't want to meet, friends who consider threatening a member of his family to be a personal insult that requires a personal response." Marcello's confident expression was beginning to show the first signs of uncertainty. "Now, Tony, I'm going to make you a promise. If anything happens to Sammy, if anyone associated with you or the people you work for approaches him again, if he experiences any kind of problem or harassment or threat, I'm going to hold you personally responsible." Dean's voice remained calm, conversational, but his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. "And when I hold you responsible, Tony, I'm not going to come after you myself. I'm going to call Frank, and Frank is going to call his friends in Chicago. And those friends are going to have a very serious conversation with your bosses about why one of their employees is creating problems for people who are under the protection of very important people." Marcelo's face had gone pale as he began to understand the implications of what Dean was saying. "But that's not all, Tony. I'm also going to call every venue owner in Las Vegas, every booking agent, every person who has any influence in the entertainment industry in this city. And I'm going to explain to them that anyone who discriminates against Sammy Davis Jr. for any reason will never see another Rat Pack performance, will never get access to any performer we work with, and will find themselves cut off from the most profitable entertainment acts in the city." Dean stood up, his movement unhurried but final. "So, here's what's going to happen, Tony. You're going to forget you ever had a conversation with Sammy. You're going to tell whoever sent you that Sammy Davis Jr. is off limits, that he's under the protection of people they don't want to make enemies of. And you're going to make sure that word gets passed to anyone else who might have similar ideas about threatening my friend." Dean paused, making sure he had Marcelo's complete attention. "Because if you don't, Tony, if anything happens to Sammy, or if he gets even a dirty look from anyone connected to your organization, I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your very short career explaining to some very dangerous people why you thought it was a good idea to threaten someone under Frank Sinatra's protection." The conversation was over. Dean walked away, leaving Marcelo sitting at the table with the understanding that he had made an enemy of people he couldn't afford to have as enemies. Within 24 hours, word had spread throughout the Las Vegas underworld that Sammy Davis Jr. was under the personal protection of the Rat Pack, and that anyone who threatened him would answer to Frank Sinatra's connections in organized crime, connections that went far higher up the chain of command than Tony Marcello could ever reach. Sammy never experienced another direct threat from organized crime figures. The racial barriers that had limited his opportunities continued to fall, partly because of the changing times, and partly because Dean's promise had made it clear that discriminating against Sammy would have consequences that extended far beyond lost booking fees. Years later, when people asked Dean about the incident, he would always give the same response: "Sammy was my friend, and friends protect each other. It doesn't matter what color your skin is or where you come from. If you're talented and you work hard and you treat people with respect, then you deserve to be treated with respect. And if someone threatens that, and they're going to have to deal with me." The story became part of Rat Pack legend, told and retold as an example of how genuine friendship could overcome prejudice, intimidation, and the kind of systemic racism that had limited opportunities for Black performers for generations. If this story of friendship, loyalty, and standing up to racial intimidation moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs to know that true friendship means protecting the people you care about, regardless of the cost. Have you ever had to stand up for a friend who was being treated unfairly? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the moments when courage and loyalty triumph over hatred and fear.